Welcome to the Natural Capital podcast, produced as part of the Farm Advisory Service in association with the Scottish Government. My name's Harry Fisher, the host of the podcast, and over the course of this season, we'll be exploring topics related to Scottish natural capital, including what this means, its value to society and farmland, and the pressures and opportunities currently facing it. To do this, we speak to a wide range of people currently working and operating within this space, from farmers putting in work on the ground, scientific institutes looking to put research into practice, and government and industry putting funding into action that can make change. Today we are joined by Lorna Cole, Louise Bond and Al McVittie to talk about their collaboration on the newly published CREW report and what this could mean for Scotland's watercourses and land use. Hello everyone, just to kick us off, I was wondering if we could just do kind of around the house to do a bit of introductions, just to say who you are, what you do and why you do it.
Hi, I'm Lorna Cole. I'm a senior ecologist at SAC Consulting. So for me, that's my ideal job. I love nature and I love being out and about in the countryside. So the work we're going to talk about today, I found it really exciting and interesting because it let me look a bit more at how nature-friendly farming practices can influence water, wildlife, and also the farm business itself.
Hi everyone, my name's Louise Bond and I work for SEPA, Scottish Environment Protection Agency. I'm SEPA's lead on natural capital and nature finance, and I was involved in the project steering group responsible for commissioning this work via CREW. And I'm interested in how taking a more holistic natural capital approach to river basin planning can support investment in Scotland's agriculture and improving the water environment.
Hi everyone, my name's Alistair McVittie. I'm an environmental economist at SRUC and I've been researching areas around natural capital and ecosystem services for a number of years. And it's really exciting how this is bringing together all these different strands of work about agricultural production and environmental protection into that more holistic way of looking at land management.
That's great. Thanks, and thanks all for coming on the podcast today. This should be quite an interesting topic. You gave a bit of context to there, Lorna, but for those who don't know, would you be able to explain, what CREW actually is? When was this formed and what does it set out to achieve?
So CREW is Scotland's Centre for Expertise for Water, and for people that haven't heard of it before, it's a Scottish government-funded initiative that basically helps to create a bridge between science and policy. So CREW works with experts from all across Scotland's research institutes, the universities and the colleges, and it aims to help answer questions that the governments, regulatory bodies, private and public organisations may have. So it really focuses on all things water, so water quality, flooding, sustainable water management and aquatic ecosystems. So it's got quite a broad remit, but basically it aims to ensure that a whole wide range of bodies can seek expertise and conduct research on any emerging issues.
That's great. And specifically today, I think we're going to be talking about the newly published Natural Capital and River Basin Management Planning publication. Would you be able to tell us a bit about this report specifically? Why was CREW commissioned to undertake this and what was it kind of looking to achieve and find?
SEPA are really interested in looking at natural capital as a mechanism for aligning across multiple policy areas. So with the triple crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, the need to adapt and respond to climate impacts and pollution, and increase in pollution, we really need to sort of be taking a more holistic approach to looking across this integrated policy landscape. And it was recognizing that natural capital offers a sort of powerful mechanism to allow us to align that decision making and integrate across the sort of policy landscape. And then combining that with a look towards Scotland's next river basin management plan, which is our BMP4, it's that sort of recognition that we need to move beyond addressing end of pipe perhaps diffuse pollution and point source pollution pressures, and look to more the need for integrated landscape scale actions to look at improving ecosystem resilience and ecosystem function. So it's that recognition that we need to look broader, we need to work with multiple stakeholders. That was really at the heart of why we commissioned this work with Crew and with the research team here. So I think in terms of why we wanted the work to happen, there was kind of 5 key elements to that, and that was looking at identifying what the benefits are, so what are the ecosystem services that the water environment delivers for Scotland, and that's Scotland's nature, Scotland's society, and Scotland's economy. And then which of those natural assets have the most significant influence and impact or benefit from the water environment, and what does that mean for river basin planning? The third sort of key question that we asked the research team to address was how does the implementation of actions to protect and improve these natural capital assets, what do they actually mean for affecting the condition of the water environment? And that could be individually or in combination across the landscape catchment scale. And what does that mean for these sort of wider impacts? And then as part of that, there was also a look at the sort of value. How do we value the water environment, and what does that mean? And as part of that is the sort of monetary costs and the potential benefits that are derived from these ecosystem services, but equal, what are the non-monetary values that we underpin through improving the water environment? And then the fifth area is currently what data, research and tools are available to help us do that, to inform on the condition and the opportunities for improving these natural assets, and what further data and I guess research gaps do we need to invest in. So that was basically why we felt that this research was particularly crucial, and the sort of timing is really helpful in building the next river basin plan.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite a nice overview of what they was looking to achieve. And yeah, Louise, from reading the report, one of the kind of main themes seemed to be that this idea that we need to start taking a natural capital approach. So why was this viewed as the kind of the direction that was needed to take, and maybe a move away from tackling pollution at the riverbank, and instead looking at a kind of whole catchment and like you say, kind of a whole natural capital approach?
I think what we've been realizing, and what the stakeholders are telling us, that we sort of need to look across the board in terms of how we work, in terms of how we regulate, but also how we work to influence and positively engage with stakeholders. And I think it was that recognition that a whole catchment scale approach will help us to better deliver, and it's definitely the most appropriate scale for decision making. And this is from a sort of ecological and an economic perspective, because it allows us to align these sort of integrate and sometimes competing policy areas. And managing land and water interactions at a catchment scale enables us to look at cumulative pressures and to better understand the interactions between different land-based systems, and what that means in terms of how we address these. So you'll all be aware of how impacts might be felt downstream if you look at things like flooding, for example, but how often the solutions can be found further upstream. So it is working across that catchment from source to sea, and recognizing that we need to look at different tools and different approaches within river basin planning. So it's not just about regulation, it's about better incentivizing and collaborating with stakeholders. And a natural capital approach provides that framework and some of the tools to be able to do that in a more sort of holistic way.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, in the report, I think it looked into, taking this kind of natural capital outlook on it. It kind of delved into, what are the range of different nature-based solutions that we could be implementing across kind of a catchment, not just at the riverbank. Lorna, would you be able to talk a bit about that and some of the research done? So I think it looked into things like buffer strips, peatland restoration and hedgerows, and their impact on the environment. What was the kind of findings there?
Yeah, so I guess it's worthwhile first explaining what exactly we mean by nature-based solutions. So in the report, we took nature-based solutions to refer to a wide range of actions that effectively protect, restore and enhance natural resources. And these actions are specifically trying to address challenges that we face. So this could be flooding, it could be water quality, it could be climate change. So nature-based solutions could include planting woodlands along watercourses, peatland restoration, or even the use of cover crops. Basically, we found a lot of these actions delivered a wide range of different benefits. So if we look at planting trees along riverbanks, the trees, they provide natural flood management. They slow the watercourse, they slow water flows, they increase infiltration, but they also intercept pollutants. They provide habitat for wildlife, and that's both wildlife in the stream and on land. They capture and store carbon, and the tree roots can help stabilise riverbanks. So these benefits become even more remarkable if we were to compare planting trees to hard engineering solutions. So, for example, a concrete flood wall, which really only does one thing, it reduces the risk of flooding, whereas our nature-based solutions can deliver a much wider range of benefits.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me of our previous podcast episode there was with Nature Scotland, their new natural capital tool. Was that somebody that you worked with? I think it's Donya and Sophie that we had on last time. Did you work with those guys? And because they were looking into that kind of spatial element of nature-based solutions and how it can kind of achieve the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, Donya was on our steering group, so it was great to have her input. And we always hear people talk about the right tree in the right place. So this research really demonstrates we could expand that to the right nature-based solution in the right place. So how we implement, where we put these different nature-based solutions within a catchment will influence the benefits they provide. An example of this could be hedgerows. So hedgerows are great at intercepting overland flows. So that can reduce surface runoff and soil erosion. So it saves topsoils and it protects water bodies. So if we were to look at the surface runoff patterns on a catchment or on a farm, that can help us determine where the best place to put a hedgerow is to intercept these runoffs. We could also look at the other benefits that a hedgerows provide. So, for example, could you place them to connect two woodland blocks, helping wildlife move around? Is there potential to play about with their orientation? So could we place them at right angles, for example, to prevailing winds to ensure they're effective shelter belts and protect crops and livestock?
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of leads on to the next question quite nicely, was that, many of these nature-based solutions, it kind of seems that are they're targeted at kind of, farmland and kind of traditional agricultural production. Were a lot of these nature-based solutions, are they aimed to kind of, co-benefit, farmland and agricultural production? Are these things that could be, put alongside and be something that could help a farm business as well as provide the benefits that you were talking about to water courses? I imagine this is probably kind of one of the areas of friction that the report delved into.
I think, Harry, that's a really important question. Ultimately, we need our farmland to produce food. We want to ensure that our farms are economically viable and that we increase Scotland's self-sufficiency when it comes to producing food. The review, I won't lie, it did find some trade-offs between production and public goods. So by public goods, I mean the benefits that these nature-based solutions provide to society. So things like clean water, recreational opportunities, biodiversity, clean air. However, I was surprised that these trade-offs weren't as frequent as you might think, and often we found co-benefits to either production or profit margin or probably most often we found benefits to farm resilience. So an example of this could be regen agriculture targeted to improve soil health. So soils with good structure increase the rate that waters will infiltrate into the ground. Higher organic matters will mean that the waters can hold on to water for long. The soils can hold on to water for longer. And these actions, therefore, can help impact drought and flooding. It can help to take topsoils from erosion. We also found some clear financial benefits. Al will be able to go into this at a lot more detail, but an example of this could be that research from the Hutton Institute, they monetised fuel costs associated with compacted soils. And for cereals, this was around £35 per hectare. And for potatoes, that was around 140. So that's effectively the increase in fuel costs associated with managing compacted soils. So obviously, when you create hedgerows or wetlands, you're incurring a capital cost. And it's important that farms can access funding to cover these costs. As actions may incur costs during transitioning, so an example of that could be when you're trialling cover crops. How do you establish them? You might get failure. It could be a disaster. So again, farms need to be able to access funding to cover risks. Overall, though, what we are seeing is the evidence that nature-based solutions can result in win-wins. So improving soil health, restoring farmland habitats, that can help stabilise yields over time, and it can build resilience to future shocks. And that includes climate change, climate weather extremes, but also geopolitical shocks.
Yeah, that kind of leads on. Maybe Al, you'd be able to give a bit more information about this, but you were saying there that a lot of these kind of implementations, they might need some land being taken out of what was kind of traditional agriculture or used for kind of traditional agricultural production, and that might be, although there might be co-benefits there, that might be potentially a hard sell for farmers looking to kind of turn land from one use to another. How did you go about kind of quantifying that, putting a monetary value on the removing land from what was kind of previously production, and how does the report look into kind of trying to find what it would cost to put these kind of implementations in place?
Well, I think the key thing there is farmers will always understand what the value of the production from their land is, and they're going to make decisions about which land could be taken out of production. So we're not talking about forcing land out of production, but the way we looked at it in the report is that productive capacity does have a wider social benefit. So Lorna mentioned issues around food security and food supply. So the values we were looking at there are the value of that lost productive capacity in terms of land as a natural capital asset. And for that, we were using land rental values as a sort of indication of how that land contributes to food production. And I guess it's important to consider that loss when adding up the benefits of land use change to the water environment. So there are all these other potential benefits, but we need to sort of realise that comes with a potential cost. And I think, as Lorna mentioned, the key thing here is we're not just talking about taking land out of production, it's about changing how land is managed to provide those benefits and creating, hopefully, a more resilient agricultural system as well, because the farmers are having to deal with a changing climate, which might become much more chaotic over time. And so it's beneficial for them to perhaps change some of their management so that they're reducing some of those costs, which Lorna mentioned around compaction, they're reducing soil erosion losses, and at the same time, so making the system more resilient for them, but also then providing these benefits to society in terms of better water quality and increasing resilience to things like flood risks and drought risks. And so that's going to directly benefit the farmers themselves.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it there a little bit about managing land for that kind of wider societal good, and the benefits that some of these kind of interventions can have on kind of flood risk and water quality. Does the report look into how would those benefits kind of be quantified, and potentially in the future you could get paid for the benefit that you're providing to that maybe right now doesn't have a kind of marketplace behind it to fund these kind of actions to take place?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the key things is some of this land use change or land management change could have significant impacts on carbon sequestration within the landscape. And so there's obviously a lot of interest in developing carbon markets, either directly as an income stream for farmers. And so if you could begin to measure and verify the amount of carbon being held within the landscape, that could potentially be a benefit. But it's also important, I guess, that the companies which farmers are supplying, so further down into the food chain, are having to report on their carbon impacts. And so the demands for changing management and farming practices might come from other sources, such as retailers or food processors, and that might be reflected in the types of contracts prices which farmers are paid.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. Yeah, to see here where that kind of, the financing for these interventions might come from. And if we're moving towards, implementing nature-based solutions at scale for the improvement of the water environment, what could this look like for a farmer? How would it be a case of looking to fund these as well through kind of EECs in the future, and to be able to each farm be able to kind of quantify the benefit that they're giving? How would this look for a farmer in the future?
I think public funding is always going to be limited. So, for example, we're seeing the NHS, schools, the road department all screaming out for more money, and there's a limited pot to share. The Scottish Government are committed to try and unlock private investment to support public money to deliver nature-based solutions. Now, as Alistair mentioned, an example of this could be an airline company trying to offset emissions through investing in woodland creation or peatland restoration. It could be Scottish Water paying farmers to establish buffer strips to reduce water treatment costs, or even a whisky company investing in regen ag to build resilience into their supply chain. These all have the potential to provide a source of private funding. This investment could in turn, as you suggest, Harry, be combined with agri-environment and climate schemes, which would make nature-based solutions a lot more viable to implement. So really securing private investment, it comes down to, I think, three things. First, you need a willing buyer, so someone who sees the value in the outcomes being derived. Second, you need a land manager that's willing to do the work. And finally, you need a market mechanism to connect the two to make the transaction happen on the ground. So Louise and Lens, it provides an example where the supply chain are paying farmers to adopt regenerative agriculture, and seemingly some milk contractors are giving greater payments for nature-friendly farming. At the minute, though, it can be tricky to find a market mechanisms for some actions. So, for example, hedgerow or wetland creation. And it's even trickier to find a way to blend private investment with public money, such as agri-environment climate scheme funding. So market mechanisms, they will develop, and we're seeing the Ecosystem Restoration Code and Hedgerow Carbon Code, which should have huge potential to unlock private investment in Scotland. So currently, it's relatively easy to do it for woodland creation and peatland, with the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code to unlock private investment via carbon credits. And these can be blended with public funding through the Forest Grant Scheme and Peatland Action. So hopefully in the future, we'll see a much wider variety of mechanisms and means of blending two separate private and public investment And that should make nature-based solutions a lot more viable to implement on farmland.
Just kind of looking ahead, Louise, to the fourth River Basin Management Planning Cycle, so that's from 2027 to 2033. How do you see the findings of this report to be incorporated? You know, what are the kind of material changes that we could see in the future?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Harry. I think, as Lorna and Al have just said, I think in terms of, sort of balancing the multiple outcomes that water, environment, and other natural assets are to deliver for society, we need to sort of weigh that up and look at the opportunities and the sort of the trade-offs and sort of who benefits from that. So there's lots of activity around looking at blended finance mechanisms and different options. And I think through River Basin Planning 4, I think it's fair to say that, to address some of these challenges, we will definitely need to be looking at new and innovative ways of working. And that will require us to look at catchment scale approaches, because I think, from what Lorna's been has highlighted, it's about the right intervention in the right place and the right number of these. So it's about that sort of how can we design and deliver and invest in these nature-based solutions to deliver the right outcomes in the right place. So there is an element there about being flexible and working with communities and landowners and land managers and full catchment stakeholders to design and deliver plans that are going to be affordable and deliverable and help protect the environment and ourselves from sort of future climate change and future risks. So what investment is needed to improve your business in terms of its resilience to deal with climate impacts. So there's an element there of looking at all of these different threads in combination to identify, the best solution for a particular location. So yes, we'll definitely need to be looking at how we can sort of work with stakeholders to deliver these improvements. And we're constantly, in terms of SEPA, reviewing our what we monitor and our monitoring plans. We'll be looking at new data, innovative research, new risk assessment tools and different perspectives. And nature-based solutions and natural capital accounting is part of that toolkit. To help us across the public sector to look at joining up government policies, informing decision making and making the right investment choices, working in collaboration with landowners and the wider community. I think there's just recently, in the last year or so, there's been a focus on the sort of public sector and how we can collaborate and work more collectively to deliver this sort of outlook. And the pioneer catchments, the public service reform pioneer catchments in the ESC and the D will certainly offer that opportunity to sort of work together and sort of trial and test these approaches in terms of what they might mean in terms of change on the ground. And I'd just like to sort of finish off by highlighting a recent example. It's just up for consultation at the moment, and that is a Water Environment Fund and wider project on the Dicty Burn in Dundee with SEPA, Dundee City Council and Scottish Water, which is part of a wider Water Resilience Dundee collective, and that's looking at restoring the water environment, but delivering these multiple benefits that we've talked about through this research report. So there is ways of bringing the right stakeholders together to work collectively to address some of the challenges, and that's what I think RBMP4 will be sort of instrumental in sort of setting that framework for how we will do that going forward.
No, that's a really nice kind of example to tie things up on. Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how it can be, the kind of research from this can be used in the future, and kind of examples like you gave there. And yeah, you can start to see some of the research that was done in this report and the kind of material impacts it can have on the ground. No, well, thank you all for coming on the podcast today. That was an interesting episode about the work that you've done. We'll put any relevant information in the show notes, but is there any other kind of parallel or relevant projects, funding, or events coming up that you think it'd be worthwhile for listeners to know about if they're interested in anything in today's episode?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. There's a few things. There's in terms of like sort of governments look to blended finance and how they can sort of enable private investment in natural capital. Well, there's government's natural capital market framework, and there's sort of range of projects on the back of that looking to sort of complement the existing carbon markets and what's needed in terms of how we can basically invest in a more resilient environment. So there's lots there, and there's a program called FERN, so Facility for Facility for Investment Readiness in Nature in Scotland, and that was specifically looking to support projects that were looking to diversify their funding and financing mechanisms for investment in natural capital through nature finance mechanisms. And there's absolutely loads out there in terms of experimental models and different mechanisms to sort of support and make funding more applicable and more available. I think it's worth having a look at the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital. They share a lot of learning and projects, and just recently Nature Scot have launched their Nature Finance Exchange, and that's meant to act as a sort of a matchmaker, if you like, between the sort of project development, the supply side, and the demand for investment in nature. So potential investors who may be interested in investing in nature recovery from a business risk perspective, a philanthropic perspective, or a sort of wider societal needs perspective. So there's a lot of interest there, and there's a lot of sort of emerging tools and models that we'll be looking to sort of apply and test, and I expect different ways of funding will be coming online, not least through future agri-environment support programs, and that's definitely one to watch.
I think taking a natural capital approach to river basin management planning isn't simple. There's a lot of different components to pull together. So what should we do? Where should we do it? Who are the buyers? Who are the sellers? What are the available market mechanisms? Also, how do we actually measure the impact? Now, this is vital to the buyers who will want to know they're getting returns for their investments. I know there's a lot of different projects that are trailblazing the way out there, and as these projects navigate the complexities and help us answer the questions, these natural capital approaches to river basin management planning and to the delivery of nature-based solutions as a whole will become absolutely vital.
I think that's a nice point to kind of wrap it up on, and thank you all for coming on the podcast today. We'll put all kind of relevant notes that Louise talked about, and if there's anything that anyone interested in or they've heard that they're interested in, you'll be able to find it in the show notes. But thanks again all for coming on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Natural Capital Podcast. If you want to find out more on anything we've discussed, you can find links in our show notes, and more information is available on the Farm Advisory Service website. You can listen to all our previous episodes on the Natural Capital Podcast and all other series produced as part of FAS Sounds on any podcast provider or wherever you're listening to this one. You can access a wide variety of other resources on the FAS Sounds page on the Farm Advisory Service website. I've been your host, Harry Fisher. The producer is Ian Boyd. Executive producers are Kerry Hammond and Kirsten Blackwood, and our editor is Kieran Sim. This Natural Capital podcast is produced for FAS Sounds as part of the Farm Advisory Service in association with the Scottish Government.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.